Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is return. Let's take a moment to look at some of the definitions or the ways that we use this verb. The first way you might hear return used is to mean to come or go back to a particular place, to a person, or even to a state or condition. Right? So with this first definition, many times we're talking about a person returning to a particular place or to another person. As to the part of the definition that says a state or a condition, an example of this might be health. You might hear somebody say, I'm returning to health. I'm coming back into a healthy state or condition. A second way we use the verb return is to mean to turn one's attention back to something. Now, this happens sometimes as I teach class and I take questions for my students. We might start to kind of go down a different path and I might say, okay, let's return to this grammar topic that we were practicing. So I'm asking my students to return their attention back to this particular topic. A third way the verb return gets used is to mean to give, put, or send something back to a particular place or to another person. With this third definition, many people think of shopping, right? And so sometimes we buy things, we take them home and realize, it's not exactly what I wanted. Or maybe we give something as a gift and the article of clothing doesn't fit. So we need to take the item back to the store. That's what we're describing in the third definition there. Now, our next two definitions are connected to sports. The first way we're going to talk about this verb return is in connection to the sport of tennis. So when someone hits or sends a ball back to their opponent, so back over the net, we describe that action as returning the ball. You might hear that especially when one player has served or started the point. Then the next hit is called the return. A fifth way to use the verb return is in connection to the sport of American football. So this is where a player runs with the ball after fielding a kick or catching a kickoff, a punt, maybe intercepting a pass. So they're on defense, but they catch a pass from the offense, or if they pick up a fumble, so when the ball has been dropped by the opponent, and again, they pick it up and they start to run. That's the action of returning. A sixth way the verb return gets used is to mean to re-elect a person or a party to a particular office. So we might hear this verb used in connection to election results, right? Will this candidate return? Are they going to continue serving in this position? You should know that return is a regular verb. To make the progressive form of this verb, all I need to do is add ing to form returning. The past tense and participle forms of this verb can be made by adding ed. Our base verb, return, ends with an N sound, and an N sound is voiced. This means that my ed ending is just going to make a D sound. So it should sound like this. Returned, returned. Okay. Now, there are actually many other phrasal verbs that connect to that this verb of the day. So we will be discussing them in a little more detail and looking at some examples. The first phrasal verb we'll discuss today is to return for. This can have a couple different meanings. One way to use it is to mean to give or send something in reciprocation for something else. So as a result of someone doing something. An example of this might be, the passengers returned compliments for the way the crew handled the delay. So we have kind of our first action. Maybe we're talking about an airplane delay here. And that can be very stressful for many people, both the workers and the passengers. The crew here, this could be the pilots, the flight attendants, the gate agents, all of them kind of together here. The way they handled this, right, resulted in people giving compliments, right? So that's what that sentence is describing. That's an example of the simple past tense. A second way to use the verb return for is to mean to give or send something back in exchange for something else. An example of this: we can return soda cans for 5 cents. Okay, so here I'm using the modal can to talk about ability. And in some U.S. states, this is true. There's another word for this. It's redeem, right? So where I live, I can take soda cans to certain places, and for each can, right, they give me 5 cents. Let's move on to another phrasal verb. The next one is to return from. This can also have a couple meanings. One would be to travel back from some place or something. An example of this: they returned from their month-long vacation yesterday. There's another simple past tense sentence there. Now, return from could also be used to mean that someone is resuming or restarting an activity following some type of interruption. An example of this: is she going to return from maternity leave this month? Okay, so maternity leave would be a break from work. This would be that interruption of work to bond with and recover from possibly childbirth, begin to take care of a new baby. So what we're asking here is simple future. It's using be going to. Maybe we're asking about someone's plan. Are they going to resume working? Okay. We've got one more phrasal verb to discuss with a few different meanings, and that's return from, or return with, pardon. Return with. So one way to use return with is to mean to come back from some place or thing bearing, right? We might think of like having, holding something. An example of this: the dog returned with a snake in its mouth. Okay, so we can imagine, right? It's holding on, it's bearing that snake inside its mouth. That's another simple past tense example. A second way to use return with is to mean to come back from some place accompanying someone. So you might think kind of traveling with, being in the same place at the same time. An example of this: we'll return with our parents and siblings, and they'll stay with us for a few days. So this is also simple future, but using will. So maybe we're talking about this idea, we're all meeting in one location, but I'm coming back with these other people, my parents and siblings, which is another word for brothers and sisters. A third way to use return with is to mean to come back from some activity, some place, something, in possession of something. An example of this: she returned to work with more energy after her 2-week vacation. Okay? So in her possession was greater energy, which can be very necessary for everyone in just about any field or line of work. Now, let's take a moment to look at some words and phrases that are related to our verb return. The first word we're going to look at is just the noun form of this word. So, return as a noun, you're going to notice, has the exact same spelling and the exact same pronunciation. It also has a number of different meanings. I think we're going to take a look at 5 here. The first way to use the noun return is to refer to the act of coming back or going back to some place, to an activity, or to some state or condition. An example of this: many people were excited for the return of the main teacher. I've been a substitute the last few weeks, and I think some of the students are really missing their sort of normal teacher, right? And they're ready for that teacher to come back to the class. Now, a second way the noun return gets used is to refer to the action of giving, sending, or putting something back. Again, you might think of the action of shopping, taking something back to a store that just doesn't really work out like you thought it was going to. So, an example of this, the worker is sorting returns, which is another way to say things people brought back. Now, a third way to use our noun return goes back to that meaning in American football. So the action of running the ball after you have fielded a kick, you've intercepted a pass, or you've recovered a fumble. Okay, so an example of how you might hear this used. He's had 3 returns for 50 yards today. So perhaps he's fielded 3 kicks and run for a total of 50 yards. A fourth way to use the noun return is back to the sport of tennis. So the action of hitting the ball, making a stroke that has been played in response to a serve. An example of this, she made an unforced error on her last return. Okay, so she hit the ball into the net. She hit the ball not kind of within the playing surface, out of bounds, we might say. A fifth way to use the noun return is to talk about an official report of the results of an election. An example of this, election returns show the candidate lost by 10 votes. So here, just another way to say results. The next phrase you might encounter is in return. This phrase is noting that something is being done as a response, or perhaps as an exchange, or even a reward for something else. An example of this, in return for your help taking care of my pets while I was out of town, I want to take you out for dinner. Right? So some might say this is in exchange as a way to say thank you. That could be a response as well, but we can see that phrase in return being used. The last thing I'm going to leave you with today is another phrase to return a profit. If you work in business, you might hear different forms of this or see it written in emails, communications, other group chats, etc. But what it really means is to make a financial gain. So where income is greater than expenses. So an example of this is the startup returning a profit yet. Okay? So many new companies at the beginning, they're spending a lot of money sort of getting prepared to be in business. So it's not uncommon for many new businesses to not have a profit or not have a financial gain early on. It can take some time depending on the type of business. Thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope you have a great day.